Because of poverty, Thomas never mentioned marriage. Until that day, I saw him casually open a bottle of wine worth my entire year's salary. So it turned out, the true Thomas was one born into nobility, living in a world of extravagance and indulgence. His friends asked, "You've been acting broke for 5 years and you're not tired yet? When will you drop the act?" Thomas Kim lazily lifted his eyelids. On the day of the engagement, I didn't break down hysterically. Not until the day of his engagement. My plane flew across the ocean. Later, I heard that on the very day of the engagement, young Master Kim suddenly changed his mind midway, driving frantically toward an old, shabby rental apartment. But when he saw the place empty and deserted, he lost his mind completely. Chapter 1. While scrolling through WeChat posts, my gaze was caught by a photo. Skipping past the glamorous people in the front row, my eyes landed on a young man leaning lazily on the sofa in the background, head lowered as he toyed with his phone. One hand propped against the sofa blocked part of his face, but revealed his high nose bridge and deep brow bone. After hesitating a few times, I opened my album and compared it carefully with the photos I had of Thomas. Then I clicked into the chat with Zoe, a college classmate with whom I only exchanged the occasional like, and sent her a message. "Hello. May I ask if this person is your friend?" I sent her the photo where I had circled the figure. For some reason, Zoe had blurred that very spot in her own post. Unexpectedly, she replied quickly, "Why do you ask about him? Don't pry into this man." I replied, "Nothing really. I just thought he looks a little like my boyfriend." The resemblance was uncanny. No one knew Thomas better than I did. I could even sketch the exact curve of his frown. Soon, Zoe shot back a flood of messages. "Helen, are you daydreaming in broad daylight? Even my husband can't get a word in with him. How could your boyfriend, earning just a few thousand a month, have anything to do with him? What now? Have you finally come to your senses and decided to dump that good-for-nothing boyfriend of yours?" I cut off her biting sarcasm with a thank you sticker. I was just asking. Nothing more. Zoe had always been competitive, ever since freshman year, when she lost to my barefaced photo in an unofficial campus beauty poll. She had insisted on comparing everything with me. Later, she married the heir of a listed corporation, while I stubbornly chose to date Thomas, a poor young man. That was when she graciously allowed me to view her WeChat posts, as if granting me charity. Switching over to the chat with Thomas, I asked, "Are you coming back soon?" The pinned conversation baby Thomas quickly lit up with a reply. He sent me a photo of a conference room desk, along with a crying kitten emoji. "Still working overtime. Go to bed early. Don't wait up. Thanks for working so hard. Love you." I replied with a hug and 2 kiss emojis, then tucked my phone into my pocket with peace of mind. That's more like it. This is my Helen's boyfriend, the kind of wage slave who opens his eyes every day just to earn a few $1,000s a month. How could he possibly be connected to Zoe's circle of people? Chapter 2. When I got home, a message popped up, asking me to deliver a file to the Whale Club. I turned around out of habit, opened the company's reimbursement app, and booked a car. 4 adults. The night rarely belongs to themselves. Aside from what is given to love, most of it is consumed by unpleasant work. Wrapped in the cold wind as I got out of the car, I lifted my head and looked around. I had occasionally heard of the Whale Club. The people who entered and exited were never ordinary. My boss probably only got to step into this courtyard-style clubhouse hidden deep in an alley because of the favor of one of their leaders. Pushing open the vermilion red door, attendants in suits stood on both sides. After I stated my purpose, they respectfully led me into the inner courtyard, as I had expected. After handing over the documents, I put on a practiced fake smile and politely toasted the table. Often, there was no need for me personally to run errands like delivering files, but on such banquets, a beautiful woman was always needed as decoration. President Wu. "This is Helen from our company's tech department. Let her explain to you. She's absolutely professional." When a partner's fingers brushed against the back of my hand, I lowered my glass and quietly pulled away. Many times, I couldn't outright refuse, even if it meant enduring some stares. After a few drinks, I found an excuse to slip out for some air. Turning a corner of the corridor, I saw a door slightly ajar. The bronze knocker gleamed with a cold light, while the carved patterns on the door latch flickered faintly in the night. I glanced at it lightly, about to move on, when a voice suddenly came from inside. Haha, you mean Helen thinks Thomas won't marry her because he's poor? Honestly, the girl's not that stupid. I checked at the bank for you, heard she took out all her savings. 1,954,600 yuan. To make a down payment on an apartment, saying it'd be the marital home. 1 million? That kind of money could barely buy a toilet. My steps halted. I walked closer in disbelief, straining to hear. But look at the rags you wear. I've traveled abroad twice already, and you're still playing this broke loser game? I thought of the clothes Thomas wore that morning, a brand new down jacket costing over 2,000, cheap online pants barely 3 or 500, and on his feet, the Balenciaga 3XL sneakers I had gone through several agents to buy. I lowered my gaze to myself. Everything I wore together wasn't worth more than 2,000. Maybe I had misheard. I clenched my palms, pulling out my phone to make a call. But then I saw someone inside lean forward, hook a finger, and open a bottle of wine on the table. That movement exposed his entire profile, along with his clothes. Unconsciously, I gripped the hem of my coat so tightly my knuckles turned white. My eyes were fixed on the scene before me. For a split second, I wanted to speak, but it was as if the cold wind froze my throat. No sound came out. Thomas glanced at the man who had just spoken. I have my own pace. Don't meddle. Ha. What kind of pace lasts 5 years? Didn't you say it was just for fun back then? Don't tell me you actually fell in love with that Cinderella? Thomas's hand holding the cigarette paused. Then after a moment he sneered. What are you talking about? Even if you do care, can you really marry her? My advice, cut ties quickly. Don't waste her time. And let her find a good family to marry into. Paul. Thomas exhaled smoke, casting him a lazy glance. You talk too much. Heh. Paul gave him a half smile. You may be quiet, but if you ever wake me up in the middle of the night again, asking me to forward some discount coupons for your Cinderella, I'll cut you first. At that, a bespectacled young man timidly raised his hand. I actually think those coupons are pretty useful. My billionaire badge is already max level. No one paid him any mind. Paul continued. So, when do you plan to tell her the truth? Thomas hesitated. On the day of the engagement. Already settled on the Zhao family? And what will you say? This whole thing is immoral. Say nothing. Just let Thomas disappear. That works too. If it wasn't intentional, a girl like Helen would never cross paths with people from our circle. When the time comes, give her some money. After all, she stayed with you 5 years. Don't shortchange the girl. Their words crashed into my mind as if from another world, recklessly tearing through my defenses. I stared at Thomas, desperately wishing he would speak up and say something different. That she was different. That Helen was different. That she was his rightful, legitimate girlfriend of 5 years. But no, he didn't deny it. Didn't say a word. I stood frozen at the doorway, feeling the cold wind rush into every bone and muscle, swelling my very skin. I even wished I could see through the haze of smoke, to make out his expressionless face. In the courtyard, a bare crabapple tree was weighed down by heavy winter snow, bending so much it could never straighten again. Chapter 3. I pulled out the housing contract I had been keeping in my bag, and tears splashed onto it one by one. I hurriedly wiped them away with my hands, afraid they might damage the paper. I had always thought Thomas didn't dare mention marriage because he was strapped for money, because he was afraid my parents wouldn't approve. That day, when my mom called, he heard every word clearly. It's one thing that his parents are both gone, but his education is lower than yours. His salary isn't as good as yours. No house, no car. What do you even see in him? Just his face? You're in such a good position. What kind of man couldn't you find? Come home. Mom will introduce you to plenty of young, outstanding men. Every one of them is better than him. Covering the phone, I said, Mom, he's just joined a new project. He'll get a raise next month, and he's ambitious. He treats me well. I just like him. As for buying a house, the savings we've built up these past years are enough for a down payment. The mortgage afterwards can be covered by our housing funds every month. Isn't that getting better and better? After hanging up, I crouched by the bed, pulled out all my bank cards, and laid them out across the bed. Lifting my head, I looked at him. Let's get married. I have the money. Worst case, I'll support you. Thomas's expression froze for a moment, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. But he only said 2 words, wait a little. At the time, I thought he wanted me to wait until he climbed another rung. Wait until he could come marry me with honor and glory. But I hadn't seen through the look in his eyes. Looking back now, he was probably laughing at my naive gullibility, laughing at my passionate devotion that wasn't worth a penny. 4 days, I had been thinking about how to skillfully, joyfully give him a surprise, but I never expected that while I was dreaming of a warm future with him, he was calculating how to slip away from this game of deception. It was so absurd. I laughed until the tears couldn't stop falling. It took all my endurance not to push open that door. Step by step, I retreated. The weight of this truth pressed down on me until I couldn't breathe. Lowering my head, I pressed the dial button. When I looked up, Thomas raised his hand, and at once the whole room fell silent. I spoke as calmly as ever. Still not off work? Thomas's lazy voice came through the receiver. Not yet. Probably another hour or 2. Why aren't you asleep? I wiped my tears. I fell and hurt myself. I'm at the hospital now. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Thomas straighten slightly. Which hospital? He gestured for someone nearby to hand him his coat. Thomas hung up, stubbed out his cigarette. His friend asked, "Where you going?" We just sat down. Girlfriend's at the hospital. I'm leaving. Girlfriend? What kind of girlfriend is that? Before the words finished, Thomas leaned against the doorframe, casting him a glance over his shoulder. That glance was utterly void of emotion, as cold as a midnight abyss. The man's words choked off, fear tightening his throat. Chapter 4. I didn't go to the hospital. Instead, I took a cab back home. The apartment Thomas and I rented was a small 1-bedroom unit. At the entrance stood a bookshelf with a few books on it. Those were from the time I forced Thomas to enroll in the self-study program for an adult bachelor's degree. My mom had been right, his education wasn't high. When I first met him, he said he only had an associate's degree. We were young back then. I just thought he was smart. And life was still so long, if he worked hard. He shouldn't stay stuck at that level, even if he ended up raising pigs. A bachelor's degree would still earn him $500 more than an associate's. Back then, I worked by day and stayed up late at night to review practice tests with him. Even while brushing our teeth side by side in the morning, I would seize every minute to open an English app and go over yesterday's vocabulary with him. 10 years worth of past exam questions. Every time Thomas went through them, I would follow along too. Because of the tight schedule, it only took us a month and a half to pass the exam. To celebrate, even going out for hot pot, we first searched all the platforms for discount coupons. But now, reading the information I got through Zoe, it all just felt ridiculous. Thomas? That's not even his real name. But I can't tell you what it is. His education? I heard he went to a top university in China, then later studied abroad, Harvard. Actually, still very young. I pressed my palm hard against my forehead, the pain twisting all the way into my stomach. The door opened from the outside. I looked up. It was Thomas, rushing back from the hospital, having found nothing. On his phone, countless missed calls to me. He leaned against the doorframe, breathing slightly heavy. I said nothing as he came closer. Then he lifted his hands, cupped my face, tilted it left and right, and finally, his tense expression eased. Where did you fall? He knew he was deceiving me, but he didn't care. He only played with my fingers and smiled. Let me put some ointment on you. Otherwise the wound will close too quickly. In that moment, maybe I was too brave, too quiet, and he couldn't sense the pain I was enduring. I studied him carefully, realizing he had always been like this, composed, unflustered, never losing control in the face of any problem. I used to think it was hardship in his youth that had forged this unshakable calm, this ability to stay unmoved even if a mountain collapsed before him. But I never imagined that this easy composure might instead be nourished by extreme privilege and power. I pulled my hand away, looking straight ahead. Thomas, my mom is pressuring me to go home for blind dates. At my words, Thomas's movements froze. The smile hadn't fully faded before it hardened on his face. But I turned to him, smiling through tears, eyes filled with the love that had always been there. I told her that I I only want to marry Thomas. I'm waiting for him to marry me. I stared at him like that. I hadn't intended to cry, but I couldn't control the tears. I said, we bought a little house, and once we marry, we'll move in, then we'll have a child. Your parents will definitely love it. Boy or girl, both are good. If it's a girl, she'll look like you, with big eyes. If it's a boy, he'll look like me, with fair skin. Lowering my head, I pulled the contract from my bag. Look, when I bought the house, I added your name too. See, Thomas, how could you ever repay these 5 foolish, devoted years of my youth? You, born at the peak, for whom every extra step was unnecessary. Were you mocking me in your heart, thinking that everything I had to give was nothing more than a flick of your wrist in your world of extravagance? Thomas's fingers twitched as he lowered his gaze to the contract. After a long time, he finally looked up. Helen, what is it? I forced a light tone. Isn't it a huge surprise? Now you won't have to worry about my mom criticizing you anymore. The look of being startled by my tears vanished, replaced by his usual careless nonchalance. Yeah, my Helen is really capable. If you say you'll support me, then you'll support me. His voice was so soft, his tone so faint, that I almost missed the words that followed. Don't cry. Why cry? I never said I wouldn't marry you. But, Thomas, with what identity will you marry me? Leaning against the table, I dialed a number. While waiting, I quietly watched Thomas busying himself in the kitchen. Compared to me, he was always better at cooking. When the call connected, I spoke softly. I've decided. I can go to America. The date? My mind was hazy, but when I caught Thomas's gaze, I snapped into clarity. January 28th. Yes, that day. The day of Thomas's engagement. Chapter 5. Late into the night, the pain in my heart spread uncontrollably into my body, clutching my cramping stomach, biting down on my hand until I nearly fainted from the agony. I vaguely felt a pair of strong hands scoop me up, and that usually calm voice was now frantic. In my haze, countless memories surged back like a tide. From the day I met Thomas, our relationship hadn't always been smooth sailing. There was even one time it completely fell apart. It was the 2nd year of our love. Everything seemingly fine, when out of nowhere, he suggested we break up. At that time, I was still buried in planning a rare holiday trip when I heard his words. It felt absurd. He only looked at me with detached eyes, as if uninvolved. I can't give you what you want. Yet just the moment before, he had been feeling guilty for half the day over my burned hand. I thought it through for a long time, and apart from him not having money, I couldn't imagine what else could hold us back. That's fine. We can work hard together. We're still so young. As long as we push forward, we can get everything we want. And besides, I don't need you to have lots and lots of money. ***. He cut me off, gently patting my head, as though we would never see each other again. Helen, I'm sorry. I hope you meet someone better. Back then, weren't we all young and arrogant, convinced no one was truly irreplaceable? So I didn't beg, didn't cry, only pretended calm and pride. Thomas, in the end, you're just a coward. You don't love me enough. If that's the case, then let's part ways peacefully. If love had been overwhelming, how could he have given me up without even trying? I thought I was decisive enough, rational and clear-headed enough, because I had always weighed things carefully. If something wasn't good for me, I abandoned it. But all of that failed when it came to Thomas. We separated and vanished from each other's lives, thinking we'd never meet again. But fate pushed us back together. It was a place I should never have been. And yet, by coincidence, I saw Thomas in a suit and tie. I stared blankly at him. He opened his mouth, his wine glass turning twice in his hand. What a coincidence. I nodded, said nothing, and walked straight past him. But deep down, I had this inexplicable premonition that if I missed this chance, I might never love him again in this lifetime. For once, reason lost to emotion. For the first time in my life, I was brave enough to gamble everything. I stopped abruptly, pushed through the crowd, and ran back toward him against the flow. Thomas was still leaning against the dark side of a pillar. Only when I reached him did I realize he had been watching me the whole time. He just stood there, looking at me as I pushed against the tide of people, throwing myself toward him with everything I had. Tilting my head high, I declared firmly, "Thomas, I'll only ask this once. Do you want to get back together? If you say no, then we'll be over forever. Just this once, for love." I would bow my head and humble myself only this once. Never again. Thomas lowered his head in silence for a long time. At last, he lifted his wine glass and gently tapped it against my forehead. So foolish. Yes, utterly foolish, too foolish to understand the hidden meaning behind his words I can't give you. Too blind to see through the holes in his disguise. Chapter 6. The haze of old memories dispersed. When I woke again, I was in the hospital. It was 4 in the morning, and the birds outside were already singing. Thomas's skin was pale, made even paler by the contrast of white walls and black hair. But tonight, he looked a little haggard. Weren't you all healed? Why did the pain suddenly get so bad? Seeing me awake, he reached out and gently rubbed my stomach. On the bedside table sat a thermos I had never seen before. Now that I thought about it, our home often seemed to have things I didn't recognize. Following my gaze, he explained, "It's porridge I ordered. If you feel better, drink a little." I drew back my eyes and moved my fingers slightly. "Do you know the stomach is an emotional organ? Maybe it's my emotions that are sick." He chuckled. "Who bullied you? Tell me. I'll stand up for you." It was the same answer as always. He had casually said things like this so many times before. I used to brush them off as nothing. What could he, just an ordinary man with nothing but strength to his name, really do for me? But after seeing him once kick down the man who had verbally harassed me, I tried not to tell him much about the grievances I suffered outside. We couldn't afford the medical bills or compensation that might come from one rash act of violence. Anything I could endure, I chose to swallow in silence, except for that one time, when I faced sexual harassment at work head-on, risking being fired, collecting evidence, publishing a statement, and filing a lawsuit only to be crushed by counterattacks, rumors, and slander. I broke down so badly that when he casually asked me about it, I ended up sobbing out all my grievances. But later, miraculously, things turned around. The company launched an unprecedented internal investigation. The police intervened, and the manager who had been harassing women for years was arrested. I handed in my resignation. I lifted the blanket, got out of bed, and put on my shoes. He grabbed my wrist. "Where are you going?" "To work." Propping myself up, I raised my head with a smile. "I'm almost better now. If I hurry back to tidy up, I won't be late. Taking one sick day costs 850 yuan. Too expensive." "Helen, don't be ridiculous. You go to work too." I nudged him. "No skipping." Thomas went to ask the doctor's opinion, and the doctor followed behind him respectfully. So many details I had ignored before now became so obvious. Like the fragrant, exquisite porridge before me, the homemade wine from his colleagues stored at home, and the handmade pastries I had never seen sold anywhere. Chapter 7. Early in the morning, on my way to work, I walked out from the garage and immediately saw Thomas waiting by the roadside. He had once said he didn't like driving, which was why he bought this car. Except for the occasional weekend outing, we hardly ever used it. After a while, I saw a black Range Rover pull up in front of him. A driver got out, bent respectfully, and opened the car door for him. But the car didn't head toward Thomas's company. After following the Range Rover into the second ring road, it went straight toward a secluded residential area. The neighborhood had a no-entry sign. I could only park far away by the roadside, watching as Thomas's car entered. Sitting in my car, I thought back to those days when I had worked so hard revising his resume and job applications. Every resume he sent out, whether the career objective, work experience, or personal strengths, was painstakingly refined by me. Not just a generic template sent everywhere. At the time, nearly every application got him through the initial screening. But once it came to the interview stage, despite my predicting 80% of the questions and running countless mock interviews, he always failed at that final step. In the end, only the small, unremarkable company he works at now was willing to take him. The pay wasn't high, but at least they contributed fully to his benefits and pension fund. Thomas hardly spent money. Every month, his salary was deposited into my account, and I gave him an allowance for pocket money. Scenes that once seemed like proof of love and support now revealed themselves as things he never even valued. I drove to an old noodle shop I often went to, sat down, and was greeted warmly by the owner. The usual? "How come you're alone today?" This noodle shop had been my favorite since university. After meeting Thomas, I brought him here nearly every week. He's busy. One bowl of noodles with meat sauce, scallions and cilantro, don't forget both. Halfway through my meal, I asked casually, "Didn't they relocate this area a couple years ago? How come your shop suddenly reopened?" The owner glanced up at me, wiped sweat from his forehead with the towel slung around his neck. "To tell you the truth, I was just as confused. One day I was suddenly told to come back and reopen. Otherwise, with the money I have now, I wouldn't need to be running a noodle shop." I said nothing more, quietly finishing the rest of my bowl. So that was why, when hallway lights flickered on and wooden boards creaked, we were able to rent a nice apartment at such a low price. That was why, when my grandmother was hospitalized for surgery, the blood bank suddenly got replenished overnight, and a special research program appeared out of nowhere, giving us access to a premium ward. Back home, I pulled out several bags that had been stuffed at the bottom of the wardrobe. At that moment, I had no doubt about their authenticity. When Thomas first gave me one, I thought he didn't understand these things, that he just wanted me to have what everyone else had. At the time, not wanting to hurt his pride, I deliberately carried the bag to work in front of him, twirling it around before leaving so he could see. Seeing me happy, he only raised an eyebrow, never catching on, and later gave me several more. At the office, someone sharp-eyed picked up my bag. Examining it closely, "You can't buy this one easily, with purchase requirements. It's worth nearly $2 million. Don't tell me you're secretly rich." I tugged at the strap casually and said openly, "Fake. Not worth anything." Later, I hinted indirectly, "Even high-quality fakes aren't cheap. Don't waste money on these. I won't use them." Thomas just looked at me and smiled. "Keep them. You never know when they might come in handy." And he was right. I had saved for 5 years and still couldn't afford an apartment. Yet now, just 2 or 3 of these bags could buy one. I blinked, and the emotions that had been pressing on my chest since last night surfaced once more. It was resentment. I realized clearly just how unwilling I was to accept this. Thomas, if it had only been pure deception and manipulation, maybe I wouldn't feel so resentful. But you, mixing a trace of sincerity into this endless web of lies, who exactly were you trying to trap? Chapter 8. I would feel regret for my youth that had rushed forward so recklessly. When I realized this, I thought, before I fall completely off the cliff, I should at least fulfill a few unfinished dreams. From the bedroom to the kitchen to the living room, I followed the paths I had always walked, erasing traces of my presence bit by bit. But this rental apartment carried too many memories and too much love. The slanting sunset cast its glow into the bedroom, the pale light swaying, while a man's endless strength wrapped around you, clinging until death. It was laughter in the snow, running home, flinging open the door, kissing against it until nearly breathless. It was splitting a watermelon into 2 halves, yet fighting with spoons over the same one, leaving the other untouched. It was drinking a 12-yuan cocktail until tipsy, cupping his face with dense kisses, then collapsing together onto the sofa, hearing the vibrations of his laughter in his chest. In this moment, I resolved to leave the memories as only memories. The lock turned, and I looked back. A stranger named Thomas stood at the doorway, even though he looked at me the same way he had a million times before. I knew this wasn't him. He walked over, crouched beside me, and glanced at the suitcase by my feet. "Business trip?" I shook my head, "Just packing up useless things, clearing some space." Today he was dressed even more shabbily than yesterday. A jacket under 500 yuan, pants barely 200, underwear more expensive because I cared about quality for close-to-skin clothing. I had chosen them for him, 39 yuan a pair. Perhaps in his 20-odd years of gilded life, the greatest hardship he ever endured was the boredom of playing poor with a penniless girl, not only lowering his quality of life, but also going through the trouble of weaving lies. Thinking of it that way, I hadn't lost out. A boyfriend who, besides lying, had good looks, a good body, functional in every way, and capable both in the kitchen and in social settings. "Thomas, will you go try on wedding dresses with me tomorrow?" His brows and eyes in the light seemed frosted with silver. Even frowning couldn't diminish their elegance. He gave a small, helpless smile. Helen, about marriage, wouldn't trying on a dress now be a bit rushed? It's just trying it on. Doesn't mean we have to get married. What are you afraid of? Maybe it was the first time I had spoken the words not getting married with such a mocking tone, as if I suddenly didn't care anymore. For a moment, Thomas looked stunned. Then he pulled me into his arms, grinning playfully. Are you mad at me? I was just thinking. This road isn't over yet. No one knows what the end will be. Maybe we aren't suited for each other. Maybe my future will be with someone else. Asterisk asterisk. He squeezed my fingers, half laughing in anger. Shut up already. I'll go with you. I'll go. Isn't that enough? I didn't, as before, fling my arms around him in joy. Instead, I lowered my head and kept packing. On WeChat, Zoe asked why I was always prying about him. She even mocked me. Even if you want to cheat, at least pick someone within your reach. Why keep asking about this man? He just went to Milan with his fiancée to look at wedding dresses. Don't embarrass our alma mater. That was how I learned. The business trip he mentioned had really been a trip with another woman to try on wedding dresses. The appointment at the bridal shop had been made last minute, scheduled for the evening, and that whole day, I hadn't gone anywhere. I had sat quietly in the living room until night fell. When Thomas came home from work, to marry Thomas, that had been the creed running through my entire girlhood. I had imagined walking toward him in a white gown, flowers in hand, just like now. In the noise and bustle, I would look at him with teary eyes and ask, do I look beautiful? Of course beautiful. What bride in her wedding dress isn't? It is one of the most beautiful moments of a woman's life. But Thomas didn't answer. He turned his head toward the window. Snow and wind battered pedestrians. Ordinary lives filled with hardship, scenes he had never cared to notice before. And within the edge of his vision stood a girl, wearing a wedding dress only for him. Yet suddenly, he no longer had the courage to look back. Thomas Kim, turn around and look at her. This is probably the first and the last time. After this, she will never belong to you again. Chapter 9. At the Kim family's engagement banquet, the hall was packed with distinguished guests. For Zoe, it was her first time stepping into the world of this legendary family. Though the event wasn't held at some inaccessible old ancestral estate, the banquet took place in a luxurious restaurant, opulent yet highly discreet. Walking beside her husband, she finally got a proper look at the Kim family's young master, the very man Helen had been constantly asking about. The man wore a bespoke suit of pure luxury, a dark red bow tie accentuating the sensual air of his aristocratic face. Naturally, she could not speak to him. Even looking at him more than once would have been improper. Later, stepping out into the courtyard for some air, she caught another glimpse of the Kim heir through the crowd, just as he answered a phone call, his brows tightly furrowed. Holding her diamond-studded clutch, Zoe overheard bits of gossip floating around. Then suddenly, one name jumped out. She tugged at her husband Elias in disbelief. Did you hear that? Helen? They're saying the girl young Master Kim has been toying with outside is named Helen? The one I told you about. Who went to the same school as me? Elias flicked his ash carelessly. Not sure. Probably. Zoe thought of how Helen had been asking her so many questions lately. Life was always full of such coincidences. On her way here, she had already pieced together the entire sordid tale. So everyone in your circle knew he was pretending to be poor and deceiving a girl for 5 whole years? People have heard. Sure, but no one cares. It was just a game. Sooner or later, he was bound to come back. At that moment, Thomas Kim happened to stride quickly past them. Zoe suddenly called out loudly, fury in her voice, "Scumbag! Stop right there!" Elias flinched, hurrying forward to tug her back. For God's sake, what are you doing? You don't even like that Helen girl. Why play hero now? I don't like her, Zoe admitted, glaring at Thomas. But that doesn't mean I can't pity her. 5 years. That's 5 entire years, not 5 hours. Not 5 days, 5 of the most precious years of a woman's youth. You people with power and privilege, do you need to trample others just to feel less bored with life? I always wondered, Helen, with her looks and ability, she had lines of boys chasing her at school, and even wealthy men outside waving money to take her out. How did she suddenly, after graduation, Seem bewitched, with no suitors left, clinging every day to a broke boyfriend? Turns out it was you who cut her off at the start. Elias tugged at her sleeve nervously. Zoe, enough. Say less. Do you want to cost our family that construction project? Zoe elbowed him back, sneering. I despise you, Mr. Kim. Everyone here laughs at Helen, but I laugh at you. You're a coward. Thomas didn't get angry. His expression stayed calm as he asked, when did she find out? The woman before him said nothing, and Thomas didn't press. Just now. He had taken a call from the landlord. Weren't you supposed to move out today? I came for the inspection, but no one's here. He had more urgent matters to attend to. A few days earlier, he had hesitated, then told her, when I come back from this trip, let's have a proper talk. At that time, Helen had nodded softly, her eyes gentle. She was too quiet, too obedient, using her body to cage all her hysteria inside. Thomas took a step, then turned back to the woman he had never met before. If I had been myself from the start, the story might have lasted 5 seconds, not 5 years. The cryptic words left Zoe baffled, though she quickly jotted them down in her phone. The car sped toward the rental apartment, but halfway there, it suddenly changed lanes. Moments later, it was racing frantically toward the airport. Chapter 10. Boarding had already begun, and the flight attendants greeted each passenger with sweet voices. On every app, I had blocked Thomas's contact, leaving all the past locked away in that narrow apartment. Maybe by now he had already noticed. Maybe he was still busy entertaining guests, only after the ceremony remembering the mess outside. As expected, the plane took off on schedule. When the wings sliced into the clouds, the roar drowned out everything, all the unfinished stories. The gaze of worldly prejudice lifted high, then gently set down. Before takeoff, Zoe had called me, her voice blazing with indignation. Why are you running? He's the one who lied to you. If you don't want to hit him or curse him, fine. But shutting off your phone and escaping abroad? You're not the one at fault. If I were you, I wouldn't care which aristocratic family's young master he is. I'd drive straight into his engagement banquet today. Make sure no one walked away happy. At the very least, stir up trouble. Someone from a family like his. If he spared even a fraction, your family wouldn't need to struggle for 3 generations. It's all money. Who cares about love or not? Don't tell me you're too stupid to take it. I had always thought she disliked me, so I had imagined that if she learned I had been tricked by a man for 5 years, she would be gloating. Thank you, Zoe. My voice was soft, but steady. Even though some bad things happened, I don't want to deny those 5 years. They were years where I gave my whole heart. I don't want them to end as something unrecognizable. Zoe didn't respond. She understood better than anyone that sometimes it wasn't about not wanting to fight back. It was that fighting back would be meaningless. This was something everyone knew, yet no one cared about, even if I made a scene. So what? People had been watching the joke for so long, there was no need to serve it up again for laughs. In that world, even if everyone knew I was the one wronged, no one would stand up for me. No one would take my side. And besides, with a family like his, small scandals might amuse them, but if things grew too big, if their reputation was hurt, the consequences would be something someone like me could never afford to bear. Chapter 11. In my 6 months in the U.S., I returned to the lab, doing once again what I was best at. Liam, the senior who had invited me here, sighed more than once. Why waste 5 years on something else, when you could have achieved results much earlier? Recording data. I only smiled lightly. People sometimes take detours. As long as you turn back in time, everything can still be done, right? I would allow thorns to appear in the long journey of my life, even if crossing them left me bloodied. But who's to say that wouldn't lead to another, brand new me? As long as I still had courage, I would walk boldly forward. The road may be long, but it would also shine bright. Time was so busy that I had no time to think of anyone. Until one day, an international delivery knocked on my door. After half a year, I received that nameless package. I opened it. Inside were 2 property contracts with my name written on them. One was for a fully paid apartment in the core financial district, Wanyue Mansion. The other was the marital home I had once only paid the down payment for. The apartment I lived in now was very quiet, especially at night. In my first month or two here, I had trouble sleeping. I never lied to myself that I hadn't hoped. Spinelessly, I had hoped he might suddenly appear before me one day. That on a foreign street. If I turned around, I might see him standing there. Sometimes, at night, when the sound of tires skimmed across the pavement, I would instinctively draw back the curtain only to see an empty world. And then I would remember, someone like him would never lose his mind for anyone. Those 5 years he had spent grounded in the dust had already been an exception. In his life, he had gained so much. Any loss was insignificant. To take lightly, to set down carelessly, that was his way. Locking the 2 contracts back into the cabinet untouched. I still did not reach out to him. Chapter 12. I had always known my time in the US wouldn't be long, but I hadn't expected it to end so soon. Liam confirmed again and again, the time has come. Now is the best chance. There are contacts waiting for us back home. And most importantly, the access permit has been approved. Who knows how long it'll take next time? I nodded. Then let's return to China. Liam's company was registered and based in Shanghai, so we landed at Hangzhou. With an existing product foundation and major funding pouring in, everything moved at a rapid pace. The faster things progressed, the more manpower we needed. I was almost too busy to touch the ground, on top of technical matters. I also had to screen new hires. That was when Liam told me the investor wanted a meeting. He specifically asked to see you. Strange, isn't it? I should have realized earlier. Half a year ago, Liam had often mentioned this investor, oddly good-tempered, never once interfering in company affairs. I twirled a pen cap between my fingers, hesitating. Can I not go? Liam clenched his jaw. If it were anyone else, I could cover for you, but this one, I can't. I had never pictured what kind of setting it would be. If I ever saw Thomas again, just like his friends had said, unless by deliberate design, he and I would always remain at opposite ends of a revolving door, never crossing paths again in this lifetime. Helen, this is Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim, this is Helen, head of technology for the company. Since she joined a year ago, our speed has increased dramatically. The Thomas Kim before me looked nothing like the man I had known. It was as though that tailored suit had severed him from the past. Still casual, still languid, but in a completely different way. Now his nonchalance carried an air of distance, making him hard to approach, but his gaze was the same, forceful and direct. I extended my hand with a polite smile. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Kim. I'm Helen. Thomas kept his hands in his pockets, silent, eyes sharp as he scanned me from head to toe. Blunt as ever, Mr. Liam. I need a few words with her, if you don't mind. Liam opened his mouth, then quietly withdrew. As he left, he met 2 other gazes. Paul waved him away. Another pair of eyes asked curiously, "What's this about?" Paul answered succinctly, "Thomas was barred from leaving the country. He came up with a scheme to bring her back instead. Think it'll work?" No chance. Not with that barrier. This girl would have to peel off several layers of skin to get through. Before, he never cared about her, thought she didn't matter. But now he's made it clear, marriage or not. Fine, but he won't marry just anyone else. Chapter 13. Thomas reached out his hand, without hesitation, as if I had simply gone on a short trip. Cooled off yet? Can we reconcile? I frowned, standing still, staring at him. This was my fault. I apologize. He instinctively pinched my fingers. My gaze drifted down, slowly tracing across his 10 fingers. At first, there had been so many things I wanted to ask. Why me? Why 5 years? But later I realized, asking wouldn't matter. Thomas, I think we already ended things long ago. I freed you a long time ago. You no longer need to struggle with keeping up the act, or agonize over how to disappear. Though, truthfully, I could no longer tell where his disguise ended and sincerity began. I never agreed to that. You didn't need to, just as I never agreed to you barging into my life the way you did. Time dulls pain, but the time required is long. Far too long. And a single year, a year of sleepless nights, was nowhere near enough to fade these scars. Don't come looking for me again, please, I beg you. Let's end this here, with some dignity. And if he stepped closer. brushing away the tears at my eye with his thumb. Insist on forcing it? I had never considered that possibility, and panic drove me to scramble for answers. But suddenly, he laughed without a sound, covering my anxious eyes with his hand. Don't be afraid. I wouldn't do that to you. It's just, Helen, you still owe me one wish. If you grant it, I promise you, between us, ***. But he couldn't finish the sentence. He couldn't say any words of final severance. This moment had been inevitable all along. He had only delayed and delayed, searching desperately for some way to break the deadlock. Chapter 14. For a long time afterward, I didn't see Thomas again, yet the matter of that wish I owed him lingered like an invisible thread, tugging at us both. He didn't come to claim it. I didn't fulfill it, so long as it remained hanging there. It felt like there was still something left between us. During that waiting time, I met Zoe once. To my surprise, she had divorced. Didn't expect that. Did you? She sat across from me, her expression calm. Neither did I. I never doubted that he loved me, but the fact that he loved me didn't stop him from loving others, too. Everyone told me to just turn a blind eye. That holding power in my own hands was what mattered most. That those other women outside were nothing more than men's entertainment. And in this circle, which man doesn't have one or two? But Zoe, I couldn't stomach it. I can't stand even a grain of sand in my eye. She said she had taken half of his assets in the divorce and would live freely the rest of her life. But in a world like that, how could someone who had never truly loved tolerate even the smallest pebble in their shoe? Time passed again, long enough for autumn colors to spill across the earth, when I received a message from Thomas. I remembered all those years. Whenever I celebrated his birthday, he rarely made wishes. He would always push the cake toward me, telling me to make a wish instead. And I, without fail, would declare loudly, "Then I wish Thomas and Helen will be together forever, never to part." He had always been desireless, never needing to wish for anything in this world. So I couldn't guess what it was he now wanted me to grant. Not until I stepped once more into that rental apartment. Nothing had changed, not the arrangement of the furniture, not even the angle of sunlight slanting through the windows. On the table, a few dishes were laid out. From the kitchen came the clatter of pots and pans. I moved instinctively, muscles remembering countless times, leaning against the doorway to watch the man inside. He didn't turn, just as before, calling over his shoulder, "One more dish. Then dinner's ready." Thomas's cooking had never been very good, only slightly better than mine, but at least edible. I picked at one dish after another. He never lifted his chopsticks, only watched me eat. It was just like those years, an utterly ordinary day. Yet now, because of farewell, it carried the weight of an ending. Did you know how to cook back then? I asked the question that had bothered me for so long. No, he shook his head. At first it was Aunt Karen, the nanny who raised me. When I told her I wanted to learn to cook, she was so shocked she touched my forehead to check for a fever. "Honestly, your cooking isn't good at all, but you always ate so happily." The room slowly darkened. Neither of us turned on the lights. We sat together on the edge of the carpet. "I should go," I said. "Helen, through all these years, it wasn't without real feelings." I crouched down, tracing his brows and eyes with my fingertip. "Then will we marry?" We wouldn't. So he was silent, unable to give a promise. But if I asked Thomas, he would shout it out loud. He loved me so much, he would surely agree to marry me, and stay with me until our hair turned white. You know better than anyone, the ending is already written. Only the process changes. Sometimes, I wish there really were a Thomas in this world. He pulled me into his arms, an embrace so fierce it felt like we could merge into one. One wrong step, then another. Some people were never meant to meet, to know, to fall in love. But you had to break through the walls, rush until exhaustion, only to end with shattered bones and blood. He let me go, patting my head gently. "Keep the things I gave you. That way, if your next boyfriend has a bit less wealth, you won't have to suffer for it. But he mustn't rely on your money to laze about, refusing to strive. Before you commit, at least check his family background. Ask about his income. If you can't find out, let someone tell me. Don't just dive in blindly again." I will. Chapter 15. I knew he was watching me. But I didn't turn back. With my back to him, I walked forward step by step. My phone rang. I answered. On the other end, before, even when I hit you with a stick, you still wouldn't break up. You cherished him so much, and now you say it's over. Just like that? Did he hurt you? I said. No, he didn't hurt me. We just weren't right for each other anymore. On the other end, is it because of money? Your mom thought it over, so what if he has no money? Do you really think I nagged you all the time out of greed or disdain for the poor? I just didn't want you to suffer with him. I said. Mom, after the breakup we barely stayed in touch. I can't find him anymore. How could that be? But how could it not? Some people are only passers-by, yet because their weight is too heavy, too deep, they become the boldest, darkest stroke in a life's chapter, destined to be unforgettable, year after year. Chapter 16. Thomas was never one to cling endlessly when someone couldn't be kept. Letting go was the more dignified choice. Yet loss is a process. It burrows through your thoughts with time, little by little, though he never let damp emotions run wild, unchecked, until one day, by sheer coincidence, Aunt Karen asked with a cheerful smile, "Does that little girl of yours still like jujube pastries? The dates just fell in the courtyard today. I picked some up. Fresh ones will taste the best." He froze in place. Regret surged over him like a tide, pain creeping into his chest bit by bit. No, Aunt Karen, there will never again be a little girl who loves jujube pastries.